There's so many ways to take my participation in this democracy away because I don't fit exactly what they want and I don't behave exactly what they want. And I want people to understand that that can be you immediately. Even if you look in the mirror and you think, I'm in the in group. Nope. Don't you dare step out of line. Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Well, this summer is turning out to be quite eventful in the news department. The country is doing extremely poorly, which is why Donald Trump and his party are 100% focused on making sure the elections are rigged sufficiently to stay in power, while the rest of us are doing everything we can to make sure that our voices are heard and our votes are counted. We all know this. So today, I thought we could take a 30,000-foot view of what we're looking at in the big picture of what Donald Trump and his enablers have in store for this country, and how familiar a plan that really is when you look at the history of our nation. To do this, I've invited Joseph Kelly to join us. Joseph Kelly is a professor of literature and history at the College of Charleston, the author of 2 books on American democracy, Marooned and America's Longest Siege. His newest book, The Biggest Lie, The Prehistory of American Fascism, that came out last week, traces the roots of fascism back to the antebellum South. Essentially, this is a book that reframes the idea of fascism as an American invention, and not one we imported from Europe. People think that fascism could never happen here, but it's more likely that it actually started here. Perhaps we aren't borrowing from Germany in the 1930s, we're simply repeating our own history. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, professor, author, and American patriot, Joseph Kelly. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you, Lee. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me right here in the heart of the summer. Your newest book, which just came out, The Biggest Lie, deals with the years in America between 1818 and 1915. But I feel like it's so pertinent to this moment because I think those of us who have bought into the mythology of the American story, this land of freedom and opportunity, this beacon of democracy, the land of the free and the home of the brave and all of that stuff, living in America right now feels very destabilizing, like we don't recognize our country. But there are many Americans, particularly non-white Americans, who are not remotely surprised at what's going on. And I think have in fact been trying to tell us for generations that what we're witnessing now is actually very much who we are. As you write in your book, when American fascists were sort of mimicking the Third Reich in Germany, fascism was seen as this terrifying, radical new European import for Americans, but it's not. And in fact, you argue that it didn't even come from abroad, that nothing about this is new or radical, that the seeds of American fascism were planted right here by elite Southern plantation owners who didn't think slavery needed to be addressed in the Constitution, and this top-down master race stuff has been here since the beginning. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'll say also to tie this into current times. I mean, in the beginning of the book, I say I'm not going to be talking about Donald Trump at all, and I don't in the book. I leave that to readers, although it's probably not hard to guess where I stand on contemporary issues. But what got me started writing the book in the first place was this bizarre phenomenon that I saw in 2020 where intelligent people I knew, politicians who I respected even though I disagreed with them, were telling what was called the big lie. You and I knew, I guess maybe a lot of people on the street might not have known it, but I think pretty much everybody knew. Everybody knows they're lying. They know they're lying. They're lying to people who know that they're lying and are accepting the lie. And it was such a bizarre phenomenon for somebody who grew up in the 1960s and 70s, where Watergate was sort of the initiating political moment of my own life as a kid, to see how the culture of the country had shifted to this. So that made me very curious. And I was originally looking into how we established, what we call liberal democracy, which is really only about 100 years old. If you think about figuring out how a democracy can work with a country that's got over 100 million people in it, how can they possibly really govern themselves? How can popular consent really have any meaning when a country is that big? And the institutions that made it work really were established in the early 20th century. In my own profession, I'm a professor at a college. I teach in the English department, actually, not even in the history department. And in the English department, I do Irish studies, so kind of bizarre. But yeah, so academic freedom did not really get established until, it began getting established in 1915. what we think of as a professional press. The press is to seek truth and publish it. That is the imprimatur. That's 1923. That's established. So these institutions have not even been with us 100 years yet, or barely 100 years. So originally, I was very interested in how those institutions got established. And I was going to look at the 1920s and 1930s and the battle between people who would be called advocates of liberal democracy and the people they opposed. And the first chapter, I wanted to establish that fascism was a real danger in the United States. As a matter of fact, we were really headed not towards liberal democracy after World War I. We were headed somewhere else. So I started working on that chapter, and I just kept working backwards and backwards, because what I started doing is trying to figure out, how did we learn to lie? Why do we need these constitutions of knowledge, to quote Jonathan Rauch, the philosopher? Well, we needed them because we'd had 100 years of lying. And I kept tracing that back further and further. So beginning, if I'm starting at World War I and going back, we go back to the Spanish and American War and see the rhetoric that comes out of that, see the kind of zeitgeist in the nation, what counts as patriotism. And it becomes patriotic to lie. You have to pretend that the white man's burden is a real thing, But where did that come from? Well, that came from Jim Crow. Takes us back to 1876 with the redemption of the South and the big lie that's getting told about Reconstruction, right? All of Jim Crow is predicated on lying about what happened with the biracial republic in Reconstruction. And then, of course, preceding that is the Confederacy itself. And before the Confederacy, the amalgamation of southern states, where we really have almost two nations within one nation. And the southern states are predicated upon the lie of white supremacy. And there's a tendency, I think, for people to think, people thought that way back then, people were white supremacists, and they gradually, as science got better and we learned more things about humanity, we learned that was wrong, et cetera, et cetera. That's not really how it was. I mean, people knew in the revolutionary generation that all men were created equal. Everybody believed that. Everybody believed that. So how did we get to a point in the 1830s in the South where if you said all men were created equal, you might get lynched, you might get exiled? How did that happen? And so that's what this book is looking at, is really, how do we become a nation of lying? How do we end up telling the big lie, which is white supremacy?
I also think it's a really important point in what you said there, is that we forget often how young our country is, how new the things that we take for granted really are, our institutions that hold things up, which I think is what makes them easier to dismantle, because they are not so firmly established from hundreds of years. We've only had them, as you're saying, for, less than 100, and that our country is so big. Like, it's just such a gigantic country to try and manage and control. And this idea that, these ideas, these fascist ideas, the master race stuff, the behavior of the police, the way we look at top-down stuff, and as you're saying, the lying, again, not new. We've been here before. This is who we are. I think about citizens being shot dead in the street without consequence. When we look at that, we go, well, Renee Good and Alex Preddy from these ICE raids. And you're like, no, this has been happening for years. The Black community will tell you it has been happening for years. We're watching the completely out of line jail times happening to, say, the protesters in Texas, getting 50 to 100 years for having the audacity to film ICE agents. And again, the Black and brown community will tell us that we have had a corrupt Justice Department for generations that has been giving way out of line jail times. The moneyed elite in this country has always been good at deploying disinformation and biases to make sure that people are angry, that they stay afraid. It's not just a result of the Trumpification of our world or our media. Even the concept that allows some people to believe that they're part of a master race, that they should rule over the rest of us, has clearly been here since our founding. I think people often forget that Hitler actually modeled how he treated the Jewish community on how Americans treated the slaves. So fascism, as we know it, is inextricably linked to American slavery, to American history. And I think that the founding fathers, they had to address slavery. I mean, they were right there. It was right there. At the same time, they were writing the Declaration of Independence. And as you're saying, all men are created equal. And so correct me if I'm wrong, But was it just the hope that they could just come back and deal with the enslavement issue after they won our independence? That they just thought they had to do what they had to do to get the 13 colonies to fall in line so they could be a united front, so they could fight the war. And they knew that they'd made compromises, but they just kicked the can down the road. And unfortunately, because they didn't deal with the problem just festered in the very foundations of our nation.
Yeah, that's what W.E.B. Du Bois says too. They needed to address this right at the beginning, and the fact that they kicked the can down the road made it worse and worse. How it happened? I mean, it's really fascinating study in how a committed minority can manipulate the majority. In the Declaration of Independence, for instance, there was originally a clause, of course, that Thomas Jefferson wrote that one of the grievances against King George was the establishment of the slave trade. I'm not going to get the exact wording right, but where we went to Africa and kidnapped men and brought them here to a place that, that was strange to them, et cetera, and that this was an offense against humanity. And it was removed from the Declaration at the protest of delegates from South Carolina and Georgia. 2 states. Already they were beginning to call South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina the Deep South. If the other 11 colonies had called their bluff and said, no, we're going to keep it. You can go on your own if you'd like, which they would not have done because of the gigantic population of Black Americans living in South Carolina, especially. They needed to be attached to the other colonies because they needed the protection if there was going to be a slave uprising. They needed the rest of the country to come to their aid. So I think if the bluff had been called, of course, it's counterfactual history. Who knows what would have happened? But probably slavery would have been abolished in all of the states as it was in the northern states after the Revolution. And then the same thing in the Constitution. The slave clauses in the Constitution is a compromise that delegates made against their conscience, knowingly against their conscience, thinking that slavery was going to die a natural death in the free republic. And actually, we tend to regard that as a kind of naive or a moral failing. And, it is kind of a moral failing. Well, not kind of, it is a moral failing. But they were right, actually, that slavery would not have been able to survive if it had not been for the very hard work of people trying to perpetuate it. And that's partly what my book is about, is how in the 1820s and the 1830s, we start seeing people using exactly the fear that you were talking about, the fear of replacement, fear of a slave insurrection, beginning in 1820 with the Denmark-Vesey, so-called Denmark-Vesey insurrection right here in Charleston, where I am right now. And then, of course, the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1832. So from the very beginning, the Confederacy, or the notion of a slaveocracy, a nation based on slavery, based on the notion that all men are not created equal, repudiation of the Declaration of Independence requires the deployment of this fear of replacement, that Black men are going to come into your bedroom and slit your throat and rape your wife. That is literally the fear that was getting spread in the 1820s and the 1830s.
Yeah, which isn't so far off from what we're seeing them try to do today with immigrants, as if native-born Americans don't kill way more people every single year. I mean, one of the things you say is that the original lie of American fascism is this idea that this nation belongs to one group of people. And I think that we are seeing that play out pretty clearly right now in Trump's second term, now that the federal government is so clearly being run by white Christian supremacists that include, of course, the Trump administration, all his officials, the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society. And under those forces, America seems to be devolving, at record speeds. Your book is looking at a period of time between 1818 with the Missouri Compromise to 1915 to prove that fascism has always been there. The argument, of course, being that approximately 1/3 of our population, the third that I would guess are still voting for the MAGA movement, have always had some sort of top-down preference and a real need to exclude those that they see as the other. We really kind of solidified those ideas, obviously, in the post-Civil War South with things like the Lost Cause narrative and Jim Crow laws, but we just keep adding those ideas today. I think we keep adding to them with the idea of who is a real American and this us and them mentality. And it's now kind of permeating every aspect of American society. Do you find that you're seeing that?
Absolutely. And what you're describing, I think, is a battle over the narrative of who we are, where we came from. We could see from 1932 and the New Deal on. So part of what happened in the New Deal when they decided to hire artists and writers across the country who are out of work. One of the things that they did is they started writing histories of every single state. There were actually travel guides, but they would have a 10, 15-page history of each state. And these are rewritten histories, kind of Howard Zinn people's history of America for every single state in the country. So they started changing the narrative and saying this is a country that belongs to all of us. Those histories were telling the story of the plain folks, certainly not the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant of mythology. We had, what is it, almost 90 years of that. You can look at it if you look at World War II films. The classic, almost cliche World War II film is going to have a platoon of a variety of people from all over the country, and we can see increasing racial representation in those films. So you have to have you have your token Jewish soldier, and you have your token Irish American soldier, and your Italian, and then eventually we even get African American soldiers, and that's a narrative about, a microcosm of the United States. Who are we? We are plain people thrown together who've got to figure out how to govern ourselves. That narrative was, definitely not in the ascendant before the 1930s, but it very quickly established itself because it's the truth. We see that getting unraveled now. This is what Donald Trump is doing. He's rewriting the narrative of American history. We can see it in the 250th celebration. The story that he wants to tell, the story that his regime is telling, is a story about certain people count and other people don't count, and those other people are trying to take your birthright from you. Those other people, of course, are Americans. So the notion that Donald Trump's a great patriot, is so ludicrous because first of all, I'm a Democrat. He's vilified me any number of times for being a Democrat, right? I don't count.
I believe you're a trash person. I think we're called garbage almost consistently.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of trippy to have a president constantly talk about one half of the country as if we are human garbage that needs to be removed. It is very weird and it is very disorienting, I think. But I also think that conceptually you're saying, fascism has always been here in America.
Yep.
You explain it really well in the book because you're talking about what leads up to the 1890 Missouri Compromise, which I'm sure most people do not know. We barely know our regular, Civil War history, but this Missouri Compromise at the time, just so people understand, was a debate over whether Missouri should be admitted to the Union as a free state or a slave state. And the elites who were financially invested in slavery started working against this idea that there should be a path to equality. And they began at that time promoting the opposite narrative, what you were talking about before, the opposite, which is sort of pro-slavery, that humans were by nature innately not equal. And as you seem to suggest, it was those people, the pro-slavery, the people who wanted segregation, the ones who were the ones who pioneered many of the techniques that are now used by modern fascists and modern supremacists to dismantle our democracy. They were kind of stoking that fear of certain outgroups that really were coming up. It's the 1800s that we started targeting Indian or slave insurrections. We were afraid of them. Be afraid of the natives. Be afraid of the slaves rising up. And it's essentially anything that threatened the survival of white Americans. And we're seeing exactly the same thing today with immigrants, with non-Christians, even with things like trans people and DEI, anything that might challenge straight white Christian supremacy. And it's those supposed threats, and I say supposed because they're not real threats, from outside groups that help solidify this kind of tribalism, this nationalism that allows the people in charge to do things like suspend our civil rights or bend the rule of law, because they're saying we're doing it because we have to protect the in-group. We have to protect you. We are here to help you and save you. They've been doing that since 1818.
It began, I think, in 1818. That's where we really, for the first time, start seeing people in public, politicians, actually saying we got it wrong with the Declaration of Independence. Either all men are not created equal, we just screwed that up, or what they really meant was that all white men are created equal, which is demonstrably untrue. If you look at the history of the Declaration and the history of the Constitution and the early congressional records from the first Congresses, It's clearly not true. People believed in universal human rights. Now, does not mean that they did not think that there were distinctions between races. They did not necessarily think, as Jefferson thought, he was very concerned about whether a biracial republic would work. As a matter of fact, he didn't think it would work, which is why he thought the problem of slavery was so intractable, because once you freed those slaves, which he acknowledged, never stopped acknowledging, was justice, and was afraid of divine retribution for not having freed the slaves.
Yeah, I mean, and Jefferson is a problematic character anyway, right? If you look back at Jefferson's own history, that he could be both a man of enlightenment and a slave owner who basically had probably a non-compliant slave wife who bared him a lot of children who also all went into slavery. So Thomas Jefferson has a lot of problems, and yet he's making a good point here.
Yeah. Well, so many of characters in American history are incredibly complex. I mean, where would we be if he had not written the Declaration of Independence? Teddy Roosevelt, another similar figure with all those kinds of contradictions, you know.
Yeah, this is exactly why we shouldn't have as many purity tests today, because our founding fathers were by their nature problematic people.
Right. But we can say with absolute certainty that when Thomas Jefferson wrote All Men Are Created Equal, he included Black people in that. He thought that they had a right to govern themselves and that slavery was an abrogation of those rights. He believed that, even though he didn't live up to it.
I find him fascinating. He's also the same person that thought we should have a new constitution every 19 years, that we shouldn't be, living under, I think he uses the example of like, we should no sooner live under the rules of our forefathers than I should be wearing the same clothes that I wore as a child, right? Like I don't fit in them anymore. We need to evolve with the times. That in itself was groundbreaking, and we've never done it. In fact, we stopped even having new amendments to the Constitution back in the 70s, really.
Jill Lepore's book on the Constitution, I just started reading it, and it's fascinating read. And she talks about how the hundreds of state conventions in the early decades of the Republic, people were very used to getting together even more than every generation, many times in each generation, to talk about the rules. What do we need to fix? Maybe 9 Supreme Court justices? Maybe we need to put term limits on this, right? Or something like that.
So I am very open with people online and in real life, but when I'm home, I really like privacy, which is why even though our house is surrounded by trees and fences, I still have blinds on every window. And now that you can shop for almost anything at home, why not blinds? 3-Day Blinds has local, professionally trained design consultants with an average of 10 plus years experience to provide expert guidance on the right blinds for you in the comfort of your home. Just set up an appointment and you will get a free, no obligation quote the same day. With 3-Day Blinds, you can choose from thousands of options that fit any budget or style. From light filtering and blackout blinds to motorization and smart blinds that work with your Alexa, 3-Day Blinds can give your entire home an upgrade. And because 3-Day Blinds have been in the business for over 45 years, helping over 2 million people, you know that they're a brand you can trust. So why not get quality window treatments that fit your budget with 3-Day Blinds? Head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl for their buy one, get one 50% off deal on custom blinds, shades, and drapery. For a free, no charge, no obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. One last time, that's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to the number 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. You've heard me talk about OneSkin before, so whether you're someone who tries every new skincare product on the market or someone who's been using the same products for years, at some point most of us come to the conclusion that our skin just isn't keeping up the way it used to. That's why OneSkin is both in my skincare routine and my husband's skincare routine. It didn't just make my existing routine better, it created a whole new one for Sean. As we age, some skin cells stop functioning the way they should. Longevity scientists call these cells zombie cells, and they're what's actually driving the visible signs of aging. OneSkin's OS1 peptide was specifically engineered to address those zombie cells, so you get everything you would expect from great skincare, with the OS1 doing something most skincare was never built to do. And with summer here, this matters even more, because up to 80% of visible skin aging starts from sun exposure, which is why OneSkin is offering a new limited edition summer bundle with their skincare and SPF essentials paired together. So the OS1 peptide is helping you reverse the visible signs of aging that has occurred from years of UV, plus you're getting SPF to protect you from any new damage. It's a complete system to summer-proof your skin. Check out these bundles before they're gone. Born from over a decade of longevity research, OneSkin is helping you unlock your healthiest skin now and as you age. For a limited time, try OneSkin with 15% off using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co/PoliticsGirl. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and tell them that we sent you.
Maybe 9 Supreme Court justices. Maybe we need to
Let's
put term limits on this, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, we used to make a lot more changes. Now it feels like it's a fixed thing that we can't do anything with. And yet we still have leadership right now who are like, I'm going to disregard that part. Like I've got ICE disregarding the 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th Amendment, like constantly. They want to get rid of the 17th Amendment now. They want to get rid of the 19th Amendment, because it doesn't serve them anymore. And I think that's the thing. It's supposed to evolve, but it's not supposed to be sharpied from the record just because that's what you would prefer.
Yeah, and that's what, I mean, it's hard not to be cynical about the Supreme Court right now when they are inconsistent in their own principles. Sometimes the states have to decide this. It's very clear in the Constitution, right? And sometimes, no, the states can't decide this. If it has to do with guns, states can't write laws. If it has to do with abortion, states must write the laws. The phrase that comes back to me is a phrase that was used in Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson is a Supreme Court decision in 1896 that enshrined the phrase separate but equal, which means separate but equal. What that does is say it's okay, it's legal, there's nothing unconstitutional about separating black people from white people in the country. It is the Supreme Court's confirmation of the 20 years of Jim Crow that had been building since 1876. And what it does is open the gates for Jim Crow to spread across the entire nation and not just exist where it's been incubated for 20 years in the American South. So after Plessy v. Ferguson, Jim Crow can become the law across the entire country. So the entire country is going to become a Jim Crow nation and starts moving in that direction. The phrase that sticks in my mind is the phrase that was written in dissent. You got a paraphrase here, but the majority decision, it was a 7-2 decision, I think, and the majority decision was expressing a lack of candor. That phrase, lack of candor, is an exact quotation. And what that meant was that they were lying. They knew that they were lying. They said separate but equal does not establish a caste society. It's only black people who are putting that spin on it. It just means that black and white people don't have to associate with each other. It has nothing to do with one race being superior and another race being inferior. But of course, everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. So 7 Supreme Court justices are pretending that separate but equal, that you can separate the races and still treat them with equality. Everybody knows it's establishing in law inequality.
Which only continued further on. I mean, that's how we got separate train cars, how we got separate buses, how we got separate water fountains, how we got separate bathrooms, how we had school segregation, why it was such a big deal when we tried to integrate people back together, why we had to have so many other Supreme Court decisions to start breaking that down, that separate but equal was not ever going to be real. I mean, this is the thing. By the end of the 19th century, you were talking about this idea that like everything that had sort of built up in the South, that had been percolated in the Deep South, started to move because we had immigration, mass immigration coming in, triggered by industrialization. And then we got this whole second battleground in the fight between racism and liberal democracy, and the police state that we basically created in the South to keep mostly former slaves in line migrated to the North and was used like that. Your book talks about how back in the day, we were even suppressing the rights of white Southerners who might talk about liberal beliefs. We were suppressing the rights of any people who would defy the top-down hierarchy, like that white people were often beaten and ostracized if they were speaking up for the Black community. And that was done deliberately to send a message to keep people in line. But it also essentially was what led to this white nationalist police state in the South that then we migrated up to the North. It feels pretty clear that what happened back then is what this current administration wants the American Republic to become again, this ethnic national state where there is a leading group of people who are on top of the pyramid. And we can see now that, as we're denying rights to a growing amount of people in this country, we have a new presidential memorandum about who is considered a domestic terrorist. And it's basically anyone who doesn't perform Americanism to their exact preferences. Are you capitalist enough? Are you white enough? Are you Christian enough? And it's the America that they want. And they're trying to do it through the law. And they're using officers like ICE officers and, a militarized police force to monitor our looks, our behavior, our attitude. And I think that should be very terrifying to people, but also, I'm sure to historians, not really new yet again.
Not at all. The term that historians use for it is Herrenvolk nationalism, Herrenvolk democracy. That's borrowed, of course, from description of Nazism, the master race democracy. And the idea is if you're in that master race, then you get to be a participant in democracy. You get to vote. You get to be part of the people who have sovereignty over themselves and over the nation. It's been retroactively applied to Southern history, at least a little bit. And this is what I expand in my book, is talking about this notion of Herrenvolk democracy. But what needs to be remembered about Herrenvolk democracy, I mean, the obvious thing is if you're not in that group, then you don't have rights, right? And we can see the expansion of right now. They're experimenting with the most marginal groups, right? Transgender people, immigrants. Now we see not just undocumented immigrants, we see that they are reserving the right to treat legal immigrants anyway, to deport them at whim. When they come as asylum seekers, it doesn't matter. We can just get rid of them. So we see that the expansion of the out groups is growing, right? And we're not very far away, as you say, from labeling American citizens, people who were born here, birthright citizenship. All you have to do is call somebody a terrorist and then they lose their rights. We'll send them off to some torture prison in El Salvador. Herrenvolk democracy is a oxymoron because it's not even democracy for the group that it's supposed to be protecting. The people who are afraid of getting replaced, that the very small core group, whoever it is, however it gets defined, certainly not Democrats, we're out. Right. And now he's calling us communists. That's the age-old way.
I mean, I work in social media, right? So I'm all over what's being said online. Obviously, I can see what's being said online and the switch that has happened so clearly. There's a top-down decree that went out that said socialism isn't scaring people as much as it used to. We're seeing a democratic socialist, do what he said he would do in New York, and everyone's happier and things are going well. So socialism isn't going to scare them like it used to. So we just have to switch, and we're all calling them communists now. We're all calling them godless communists who are trying to destroy our country, and we're going to steal from you and take from you, and it's going to be the worst. That is the new thing. And you will listen to every single right-wing pundit or paid influencer. Every single one of them is screaming communism now. And I think it's so interesting because if you are in that master race, this idea of the person who gets to participate, like look at you and me, right? I am a white Christian American citizen. I should be able to participate if I am in this master group, right? But I am out. I am out as a woman. They don't want me. I'm out as a Democrat. They don't want me. I'm out as a citizen that has been naturalized by this country because I'm an immigrant. I was born somewhere else. There's so many ways to take my participation in this democracy away because I don't fit exactly what they want and I don't behave exactly what they want. And I want people to understand that can be you immediately. Even if you look in the mirror and you think, I'm in the in group. Nope. Don't you dare step out of line. And I think that's what I keep trying to remind people with these data centers that they're trying to build across America. You see all of these white Christian in-group chosen people in, say, Utah, and they all come out and they say, we do not want this thing in our backyard. It is loud. It takes all our water. It is going to heat up the land. We're going to be completely destitute from drinking water from this. And their representatives don't listen to them. They vote for it anyway because they have been paid off by the even higher ultra-rich, ultra-class. And I think here's the thing. Once you take away people's power and votes from other outgroups, you find that you have less power because you have allowed those in charge to do that. And you think you're doing it on your own behalf, but what you're actually doing is stripping your own rights. And I think people are really noticing that now. And I hope that come the November elections, people will realize that voting this way is not actually helping them in any way. It's just allowing a smaller and smaller group of people to consolidate power until their voices don't matter at all.
Yeah, I mean, look what's happening to his inner circle already. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is gone. Is not safe, right? I mean, so he's purging the women.
Of course, he started with the women.
Yeah. How long is Kash Patel going to be in the FBI? It's hard to imagine he's going to be there for very long. Let me ask you what you think of this. I think it's a real strategic blunder for them to start attacking communists because I can't believe communism has the cachet it had when I was 30 years old.
Well, I think we're talking about the same 30%. The same 30% that listened to Fox News or News Nation or whatever right-wing radio station or whatever pastor they're listening to. They're not getting the facts. It's not their fault. If you're being lied to every day, that's what you think. They really do believe that Democrats are godless heathens, that we are doing sex changes in school, that a child can go to school as one sex and come back as a different gender. Like that's impossible. But if you're being told that all day long, so if I start saying these people are communists and they're going to come for you and you're going to live in squalor and they're going to take your religion, and that's all I hear, then it's very possible that that is what they believe. That's the thing about disinformation.
I think they'll believe we're communists, but I think the next question would be, they'll say, what's a communist? Because it just, it's not like the Soviet Union has been the great enemy for the childhood of majority of the population.
Well,
right?
I do notice that they're sticking in a lot of godless, communism, when we put in God we trust on our money, when we put God in the Pledge of Allegiance, that was all in the 50s to sort of differentiate ourselves from the Soviet Union, the godless Soviet Union. That wasn't there from the beginning.
One of the things that you just mentioned too, I think we need to get much better in our messaging. Christian nationalism is fake Christian nationalism. You can't be a Christian and be a Christian nationalist. This is one of the things that excites me about Tallarico's campaign in Texas, because he knows how to talk about this stuff.
Which is why they're trying to attack him on everything from how he looks, what he eats, what his girlfriend looks like. It's just ridiculous. I think Jesse Waters has the biggest crush on him. He just won't stop talking about James Tallarico. And somebody recently put up a picture of Richie Cunningham from Happy Days juxtaposed with the guy from Dune that's like coming out of the swamp creature. And it was like Paxton versus Tallarico. And it's like, yeah, Tallarico is like Richie Cunningham. He's like a good old fashioned, boy. And you can make fun of him all you want. You can call him a beta or whatever you want to. But at the end of the day, he's a good man running against a truly bad man. And that should be the easiest thing for people to understand. I mean, your book describes how democracy can be disrupted from everything from disinformation to voter suppression to the suspension of civil rights, which we have seen for a long time and now almost on a daily basis, but how this has actually been true throughout our history. And it's just clearly more overt for us to see it right now, but it is not remotely unique to the Trump years. It's kind of same shit, different day.
And it hasn't been constant either. I mean, we see certain moments in American history where people telling these lies are succeeding, and we can see how they did it. And then they get defeated, and then they come back, and then they get defeated again. And of course, the tragedy is sometimes it takes generations to defeat them. It took the Civil War to defeat them the first time, right? And 600,000 dead. And we only had 10 years of success after that until 1876, when Reconstruction is rolled back and the lie of the lost cause gets promulgated again.
Tell people, if they don't know, what the lost cause concept is, because I think a lot of people have forgotten it.
So what the lost cause is referring to is what happened in the American South 10 years after the Civil War. So at the end of the Civil War, at least theoretically, settled the question about whether all men are created equal or not. And it settled it by saying, yes, they are. And that was written into the Constitution in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, sometimes called the Reconstruction Amendments, sometimes they're called the Civil War Amendments. But this emancipated the slaves. This assured equal protection of the laws is the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment assured the right to vote, so that it could not be abridged because of race. So those three amendments were, as Lincoln said, a rebirth of freedom in the United States, cashing that promissory note that had been written in 1776. So for 10 years, we have an experiment with a biracial republic. And of course, it's opposed as strongly as possible by ex-Confederate soldiers for those 10 years, and yet it's still succeeding. And if you look at the history of Reconstruction, it's the best 10 years in the South for 100 years.
The amount of people that were sent to Washington that were Black was extraordinary during those years. It's the reason we have the 17th Amendment to begin with, because the segregationists in the South were not thrilled. I think at the time that we got the 17th Amendment, there were 2 senators from Mississippi, and they were both Black because they were chosen by the state legislature. And so they passed the 17th Amendment to basically say, no, let's just have a popular vote to see who that goes to the Senate, because this clearly isn't working. They did it to try and do more segregation. And now modern day Republican Party is trying to get rid of the 17th Amendment because they want to have their white legislatures and their white Christian nationalist legislatures choose the senators rather than having us vote for it. Just so you know, this is something that is actually happening in America right now. They're trying to repeal the 17th Amendment so that Southern state legislatures can choose who gets to go to the Senate and represent them rather than the voters. So it went both ways. Like, we are quite ridiculous. So a fabulous bartender named Travis, who follows my work, gifted Sean and I with the most beautiful sparkling wine when we sat down at a restaurant the other evening. Then Sean and I had a glass of wine with dinner. And at the end of the meal, Travis and our waitress brought us a drink called a paper airplane, which I had never heard of and, by the way, was incredibly delicious. But I am normally a one-drink kind of girl. So all I could think was, I am so glad I am traveling with my Cheers Restore. I have been using Cheers Restore, an after-alcohol aid, for almost a year now. You take it before you go to bed or after your last drink, and it helps metabolize alcohol more efficiently and supports overall liver health while you sleep. Most people think it's dehydration that makes you feel bad, but the real issue is what happens in your brain and liver while you sleep. When alcohol leaves your system, your brain goes into rebound mode, which is what makes you feel rotten. DHM and Cheers works while you sleep to smooth out that rebound, at the same time converting the toxic byproducts that your liver has to clear out. We carry it with us everywhere now. There is a reason that Cheers Restore is backed by doctors and PhDs and over 1,000 verified clinicians. There's a reason they have sold over 50 million doses. It does really help you wake up feeling at least 50% better. Now, that doesn't mean you can drink 8 drinks and feel like you drank 4. Binge drinking is still a very bad idea, but it does mean that if you're like me and you're a moderate drinker and you maybe had 3 cocktails in one night, you can still enjoy the next day. I order ours online, but you can also get it at 30,000 retail locations, including Target, CVS, Walgreens. So take Cheers Restore after your last drink or before going to bed and wake up feeling at least 50% better or your money back. For a limited time, our listeners are getting 20% off their entire order by using the code PoliticsGirl at cheershealth.com. Just head to cheershealth.com and use the code PoliticsGirl for 20% off. And after you purchase, they're going to ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and tell them that we sent you. And thank you, Travis, for your talents and your generosity. We had such an incredible evening with you guys. I talk a lot about Quince for shopping because I feel guilty shopping in such a weird political and economic environment. But it's also made me rethink what I buy. Quince is great because they focus on high-quality essentials like breathable soft organic cotton, washable silk, but without the luxury markup. Quince has beautiful pieces, quality craftsmanship, with a price 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work with ethical factories and cut out the middleman, so you pay for quality, not brand markup. And they don't just have clothes. It's really a destination for everything from kitchen to bedding to jewelry. I just ordered their black washable silk skirt and a brown leather belt to add to my summer wardrobe, and I am loving the look. Am I loving the fact that I am now a medium and not a small? No, but that is not Quince's fault. In fact, I'm really grateful to Quince that I can afford to size up in things that I already own. So why not elevate your summer wardrobe and not break the bank while doing it? Go to quince.com/politicsgirl for free shipping on your order and 365 days of returns. And if you live in Canada, like my family and friends, it's available in Canada now too. That's QUINCE.com/politicsgirl for free shipping and 365 days of returns. Quince.com/politicsgirl. They're trying to repeal the 17th Amendment so that Southern state legislatures can choose who gets to go to the Senate and represent them rather than the voters. So it went both ways. Like, we are quite ridiculous.
That's news to me, but the fact that it doesn't surprise me, it tells us about our times. But what this means is, so we had, the Civil War, then 1876, then Plessy v. Ferguson, and then the Spanish-American War is another one of these moments at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s. Then World War I, and what happens in the aftermath of World War I with the Red Summer and the Red Scare in 1919. And then the Liberal Democrats win. We get the New Deal. We fight World War II to defeat fascism, and fascism seems thoroughly discredited, right? Now, of course, we have the backlash of the McCarthy years, but by and large, we had an extraordinarily good run. And now we are in another one of those moments. And what this means is we have to do what folks did in 1900, what they did in 1876, what they did in 1861. This generation needs to stand up and oppose this narrative of American history, this version of who we are, this notion of what the American Republic is and should be.
I think that's actually really, it's fitting for the 250th year that we once again have to fight for what we're supposed to stand for. And I think that there are a vast majority of us that realize that this isn't who we want to be or what we want to do, and how hard the people that would keep us in a top-down society are fighting back, using every single trick up their sleeve to change who can vote, to change what the districts are, to change how we elect people, if elections are free and fair. I was struck by your attention to police in your book. As Americans have watched our law enforcement for years become increasingly militarized and decreasingly accountable to us, we've witnessed police across the country who don't seem remotely interested in serving or protecting unless the protection is of the wealthy corporate class or the status quo. But that's actually how the police started, as sort of slave catchers back in the day. And now we're watching ICE get endless money, I mean, absurd money from the federal government, while they're out here terrorizing citizens, killing people in the streets, committing unknown heinous crimes behind the walls of their detention centers. And people in America are understandably horrified by this. And yet, as we said at the beginning of this episode, protesting ICE can now get you murdered or sent to jail for literally 100 years. Someone just got a 100-year jail sentence for protesting in Texas outside of a detention center. And it feels unprecedented, but it's not.
I'm torn when we talk about police, because there's obviously good police and there's police
obviously,
that
yes,
buy into this. I mean, you look at what's happening in Minnesota and what local law enforcement and state law enforcement are doing to protect the citizens in Minnesota was heroic. And that's the kind of thing that we need to look to, right? All you have to do is look to the civil rights era in the American South and see what it meant to be police or a sheriff in 1963, 1964. We don't have that. You know, there's obviously aberrations, but what we had established before Trump, I think, was some pretty good institutions. And this is why he's got to invent ICE. He's got to throw all this money into ICE because he's got to do an end around those institutions that now have traditions of liberal democracy behind them.
As sort of defunct as a lot of the police departments are, and I think there are so many good police officers that can't even find their way to speak up against the bad police officers because of the way the system has gone. I live in Los Angeles. It's a major problem, you know, who they're recruiting, these groups that they're recruiting. But I think what you're saying is those institutions were in some ways answerable to the law, answerable to courts, answerable to somebody, even if they're not doing a 100% bang up job. So Donald Trump couldn't use them exactly. He had to create a whole new army for himself, a whole new standing army who would just follow what he needed. And I think in many ways, that's what he's also trying to do with the military by giving them endless money. He's trying to buy their loyalty, right? So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if I think about your book, the title of your book, The Biggest Lie, refers to this false idea that there is a human hierarchy and that white men are at the top of it, that ultimately that is the biggest lie in our society. Because as you and many other people over the years have pointed out, race is just a social construct. It's not a biological fact. And yet we continue to see generation after generation bang on this white supremacist drum, right? But that is ultimately the biggest lie. And that is probably the biggest fight that our generation is going to have to try and fight, that we can get past this idea that there are those who are better than others and they deserve to be at the top of the hierarchical pyramid.
That's absolutely right. And we have heroes among us that we can look to who fought this fight in the 1960s. Jim Clyburn in my own state, you know, was a titan of the civil rights era. They had longer odds than we have. We've got an awful lot behind us right now. I mean, I look at what lawyers are doing, which began, you know, the ACLU gets formed during World War I to protect these rights, largely, not entirely, but largely by Jewish Americans who begin fighting in the courts. Felix Frankfurter, one of those great figures who helps persuade and then becomes a member of the Supreme Court, persuade them of the multiracial narrative of American history. So this has been done before, and there are still people living and walking among us who fought and won this battle in the past. And I don't think our odds are as long as they were in the 1960s. I think it was probably a tougher battle then. It was certainly extraordinarily dangerous battle to be fighting, and people of tremendous courage were doing things that we haven't, well, some of us have been called upon to do it. obviously.
I think every day more of us are called upon to do it. I think every day we're getting closer and closer to what it looked like where people were walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where people were, being hit with fire hoses. It is really amazing to watch. Like when you're talking about the importance of the lawyers that are standing up right now and how we created the ACLU back in the day, watching all the big law firms capitulate to Donald Trump at the beginning of his term was so depressing. And yet you still have groups like Mark Elias at Democracy Docket or Sky Perryman at Democracy Forward who are fighting every single day with their organizations, people that had great legal careers on their own and said, you know what, I'm going to step back from my corporate legal job or from the job I'm doing, and I'm going to start this organization to fight all of the offenses against the American Constitution and the American people. And they are being very, very successful. So I think that's incredibly important. I mean, we are living a dark hour of American history right now. And I think we could go one of two ways. I think this is the most fragile our democracy has ever truly been. I think really, we've had terrible moments in American history, but I think that the country imploding on itself, probably the closest we've been was the Civil War. You're trying to remind us that the elite of our society, particularly the financial elite, the Christian elite, the white elite, have always wanted this. And they have used the same tools for generations, tools like we were talking about before, disinformation, propaganda, bias, to keep the rest of us busy and fighting amongst ourselves while they continue to consolidate power. But as you're just saying now, there's always been a courageous group of people who are real patriots who are fighting back. And I want to make sure before you go, what do you say to those people right now who are feeling discouraged and helpless and feeling like our country's falling apart around us? What would you say to them, both looking at history and looking at where we are now about continuing the fight?
I would say to them, gather 10 of their friends in their neighborhood and invite the Democratic candidate for state house in their district to their house to come talk to them. And what they're going to do after that is they're going to work for that candidate, and they're going to then expand to the neighborhood that's next door. This is the kind of grassroots that we need to be pursuing right now. One of the hats I wore after Trump came to power the first time is I was a precinct chairman for Charleston County for the Democrats down here. I had to kind of resign from that to finish writing this book. But I got a real insight into grassroots politics from doing that work. And if somebody is feeling powerless, feeling despaired, gather those friends, bring them into your living room, and you will get that candidate to come. And then the 10 of you will spread out and it'll grow.
If you want help with that, people, what he is telling you right now is exactly what we talk about when we have people from the States Project on this show, or when we have people from Indivisible on this show. It's about getting together with your people to stand up for democracy. And there are organizations out there that will help you do that will help you bring those 10 people in, that will help you contact your state representative, because it is at the state level now that we can make the biggest difference. Yes, of course, we have to look at flipping the House and the Senate at the federal level, but it is states' rights that are actually standing up for us right now, and it are state legislatures and state legislators that will really help us. And so to Joseph's point, if you are inspired by that and you want to bring 10 of your friends together, there are groups like Indivisible that will help you do that, States Project that will help you create a giving circle that will give you the tools in which to organize, meet people, do that kind of fundraising. And as we often say, it's easier to flip a state house, an entire state house, from one party to the other than it is to flip one congressional seat. So when we get really wrapped up in one congressional seat, you can actually make a far bigger difference at the state level. So I think that's a really good piece of advice, Joseph.
That's one of the reasons I love your podcast too. There's always the practical advice. What are we going to do? This is not, we're not just talking out in the stratosphere. This is strategy on the ground, what sidewalk to walk down and what door to knock on.
Yeah, we can't just be upset by ourselves in our rooms. We have to be doing something about it. This is a very disturbing time to be an American citizen. But if we look at it, it could also be a very hopeful time. It could be a time that history is written about what people did in this moment to fight back, to represent what we believe America really should stand for. I truly want to thank you for writing this book, for understanding the conceptual ideas around America, which are far bigger than we often think. And please tell people how they can buy it if they want to read more about it themselves, because it's really an incredibly fascinating topic. And it's only by knowing where we came from that we can know where we want to go.
Go to your local bookstore, hopefully an independent bookstore, and buy it there. go to Bloomsbury's website. As much as it would help me for you to buy it from Amazon, it's better not to buy it from Amazon.
We don't need to help Jeff. Jeff has enough.
We do not. No. Support your local bookstore.
And honestly, we need to understand who we are as a country, and we have this opportunity now to be the people that history will write about, the people that fought for their nation and brought it back from the brink. And I think that's actually incredibly exciting. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joseph.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
So that was Professor Joseph Kelly, reminding us that America is once again in a battle over who we are and what we stand for. Does this country only belong to a privileged group? Or is it, as our Declaration of Independence and our Pledge of Allegiance tells us, for all? As Professor Kelly says, our founding fathers knowingly made concessions against what they knew to be right at our establishment. And by kicking the can of equality down the road, we have allowed this fascist top-down hierarchy to continue to thrive in a nation that was meant to be built on enlightened values and the rights of men. So we have to, as our ancestors did before, fight back against these forces for what we know our country should be. That we have to stop lying to ourselves and to each other about who we are and work to build something far more robust that can properly withstand the forces of fascism and supremacy that rear their heads in every generation. If we don't, history shows us that a committed minority can control the majority, and we simply cannot have that anymore. I want to thank Professor Kelly for joining us and you for caring enough about our country to be here. Now go enjoy your summer day and think about which friends you're going to work with to make sure this country lives up to its values. Until next week, PGR. Before you go, I want to remind you that you're not getting this kind of information on mainstream media. So if you respect what I'm trying to do here, if you learn something from my podcasts or my rants, if you would like to get this podcast ad-free delivered directly to your inbox, along with my kitchen rants and TV appearances, then please consider becoming a member of PoliticsGirl Premium by going to politicsgirl.com and signing up. If you are already a premium member, thank you so much for your support. And if you're not a member, consider becoming a patron of my work. If you want real knowledge in a world of lies, it's essential to support those of us out here still trying to bring them to you. There is a link to sign up in the bio of this episode, but also at politicsgirl.com. And as always, please like and share these podcasts so we can grow our audience, because the more people who have access to this kind of information, the better. As always, thank you so much for your time and support. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.